crazy.
No, I know about that.
That's fun. Okay, let me see what's going on with our stream here.
Just one thing, don't move it, because it just...
Okay. Let's see, fast enough. I think it's okay, so we're just going to do this anyway. Okay, so as soon as I start streaming,
Okay.
we'll just give it a couple seconds, and then we'll go ahead and get going.
Okay.
Okay? Woo, here we go. Hopefully this works. All right, here we go. Yes. Okay, so it looks like we are live here at the Arizona Science Center. Thank you for coming today. This is Nano on the Air, our brand new series all about nanotechnology. We have special guests with us coming in, and it's all happening live on YouTube. So all of the guests that we have invited for these talks have some ties to nanoscience, which is really incredible stuff. It's a study of really tiny things and what you can do with them, so atoms and molecules for new inventions and the like. If you are interested in more information about nanotechnology, please check out whatisnano.org, and we will post the link in our Google Plus page. Talk is over. So today we're really lucky. We have our special guest Matt Kim with us today. He's the founder and president of QuantTera here in Phoenix. So thank you so much for being here today,
Oh,
Matt.
It's a pleasure. I always like coming here.
Oh,
It's a great
good,
place.
cool, very cool. So do you want to tell us a little bit about QuantTera and what you guys do?
Sure. QuantTera is a company that I started here in Arizona, and it originated out of another company I started before in Chicago called Microlink Devices. And that company was doing transistors and lasers for cellular communications. That was a real manufacturing company. And then after that, what I realized was there's many types of science one could do in the area of photonics. So what we did is I started QuantTera to look at actually novel ways of using new types of materials to create new types of devices that could be used for these photonic applications of telecommunications. So that's what we do. At my company, QuantTera, we're now making and we're developing technologies that don't exist, but are novel in the sense of we have to use the unique properties of materials, and those properties are mostly based on what we call nanomaterials. So they're quantum-based materials, and by combining these materials in many various forms, we can get new types of devices that didn't exist. And a lot of it is materials engineering of how to do that, but you have to understand the basics of the devices, like what are lasers and what are transistors, and then how do you input those materials in there to make the lasers and transistors more efficient, different types of light that you can produce out of them, or things like very, what we call modular transistors that are very efficient in terms of power. That's very important for like cell phones, where you have to, where battery is your main concern.
Oh, sure, yeah. Everybody gets upset when, you're in the middle of work or something and your phone dies because the battery is completely dead.
That's very true.
Cool. That's really awesome stuff. So what are some of the more exciting things that you use in nanotechnology for these devices?
So most of what we do in nanotechnology is we use what we call quantum-based devices. Okay. So really, quantum is just another word for atom-based because that's the theory that governs how these atoms work. So if you look at nanotechnology, you have to first say, well, what is it in the sense of when it originated? And when nanotechnology originated, it originated really its inception in the 80s, even though thoughts of it were done much earlier. But nanotechnology really occurred in the 80s because there were two things that happened. One was there were scientists that were able to actually directly image atoms. Mm-hmm. And then the second thing is they could manipulate atoms at the same time. But then the second thing is that carbon-based allotropes were found. And what that is different forms of carbon. So the two forms of carbon that we knew very well before that was diamond and graphite. And then in the 80s and early 90s, they found out there was what they call graphene, carbon nanotubes, and the buckyball, or C60.
Oh, sure. Those are cool.
So when you look at those types of things, you start realizing, well, the manipulation of atoms at a high level and utilizing these materials actually can be used now, and it's very pervasive in science, where we now employ all these techniques. And let me give you one example, is we're working on right now, and it's based on some of the things that were done in the early 80s, we call quantum dot lasers.
Oh.
So these are what we call, it's a funny term, it's called a zero-dimensional type of structure. The reason why it's a zero-dimensional structure is like the atom is also considered a zero-dimensional structure, but these quantum dots are big compared to an atom. So
Okay.
there may be 1,000 atoms, and they act like atoms. And these are now used in lasers to make new types of very high-efficient lasers that didn't exist before. And so there's things like that now are actually fairly common, where before they weren't. And now that we can manipulate atoms directly, and we do this. What the interesting thing is it's kind of funny, and science proceeds like this quite a bit, is when something gets discovered, before that nothing happens.
Mm-hmm.
But once it gets discovered, then everyone, it's kind of like crystals. You got a little bit of a crystal and it crystallizes, and the crystallization just goes on and on and on and doesn't stop. And that's how science is once someone discovers how to do it. And that's really one of the things that we call connectedness of science, because that then spreads to the community, and the community then develops it further. And so it's a very interesting process, and there are some great scientists like Einstein, but most of science are not done by one person. There's but most of science involves many, and this collectivization and the community then builds things, and we have new things right now because of that.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. So people, it's been said that nanotechnology is kind of like the next big thing, compared to like on the same level as the discovery of the internet or other innovations. What are some of your thoughts about the future of using nanotechnology?
The future of nanotechnology is very huge, and I can give you two applications. One goes from the inorganic and one goes from the organic. In the inorganic side, nanotech lighting is now available. And if you take cities like Shanghai, China, where 30% of the electricity goes to lighting, 30%. Well, you need high efficiency lighting, so that's something that's going to be a huge boon, and now you can see it everywhere. The other nanotech is hitting very strongly is in bio. We're creating many new drug therapies to handle very difficult diseases that weren't happening before, and both of those things, we can find them in Arizona. Both those aspects are happening here, but it's happening everywhere in the world. And so those two areas are going to be huge. How do you make better energy use? We've got over 7 billion people in the world, and now how does that handle? And then if you look at that, the overpopulation problem, how do you handle things like medicine to all the people, which is very important.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, it looks like we have a few questions popping up on our feed. Sure. And by the way, everybody, you are more than welcome to post to our chat bar on the side of the screen if you do have a question for Matt. So we're going to go ahead and switch over to our live questions. All right. So our first question is, what inspired you to pursue science and technology?
That's an interesting question. There are a couple. I think when I look at that, there's aspects of your mentors. So one was my father. So that's fairly obvious that, and that's why education is very important in America, because our mentors are the ones that inspire us to really reach out. But really, I'll be honest, I think what really inspired me were my fellow students. I remember back in 3rd grade, I still remember this to this day. We were in the backyard and, just playing around with normal. And then I remember, I think he was a 4th grader, but he came over and he was taking apart a radio. And I said, "What are you doing?" And I didn't know that was possible. And so what I realized back then was that's really what we call the curiosity of science. And to have that is very important. And so at that point, I started realizing, you don't have to be a genius at any level. And really what it is to get involved. And really, when you look at science, I look at science as this. Everyone in the world speaks a language. Well, what is science? Well, science is the language of nature. And when you look at that, you start saying to yourself, whoa, so just by thinking about science and interacting with science, I'm actually better. It's interacting with nature. And then if you really want to take it a little bit further, you have to then say that the alphabet of science is mathematics. And so with those statements, you now can put it in, but it's interesting. I remember someone told me about, I had a young student ask me, how much math should you take? And I said, you should take as much as you can, because it's a little bit like saying, how much vocabulary should you know?
Sure, yeah.
You shouldn't put no limits.
No limits, right,
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, cool. Well, we have another question coming in here. Thank you for the question, by the way. Here's another one. It says, if you could go back in time, is there any advice that you might give to your younger self?
That's an interesting thing. But I think this is something that we eventually do learn. But one of the things that has happened is, I think, as we're, as technology has progressed and as things are easier, things are much easier generally. But what I think happens in science, and this is really what, it's actually very difficult, but while you're growing up, I believe, and I remember when I was a student, that the most difficult times were the greatest learning. When it's easy and things happen easy, you don't start realizing that you just think everything's easy.
Sure.
But the adversity of having a problem in science and trying to figure that out, that's very frustrating.
Yeah.
But you know what's so interesting is once you figure it out, it's kind of interesting. You get into a calmness, but you realize, oh, I'm glad that's over. And I had a mentor, he told me that one time, that you'll be stressing over this and you won't be able to sleep, but once it gets done, then you'll have a satisfaction, because now you have a tool set you've developed. But also, I think, really, that problem that occurred makes us delve and makes you figure out a way to solve it. And I'm telling you, the things I've learned by just bearing out a problem is the best. And I'll be honest, it's interesting. I remember if you're students, you're like, well, I don't have time to learn something. I've got to study and do. No, actually, the best I ever did was not when I studied or tried to remember things for the test, but when I figured out something in depth, as deep as it could, and then everything became transparent. I think one of the things that students try to do is they try to remember everything, but really what you should do, and this is what I would have told myself, is don't worry about everything. Learn some aspect that's very critical all the way deep. And once you have that foundation, everything else is simple.
Just really experience it.
You got to go down to that depth level, because if you don't, what happens is you're just at the surface level. And I remember times we'll have these proposals or projects where we have to get things done. But the best part of that is when we'll take some time off, and it's not time off, but you're actually taking time from work that should be done,
Sure.
but you solve the problem.
Yeah, definitely. All right, cool. So we were talking a little bit earlier before the broadcast started about some of the things that you're doing to bring nanotechnology to the community.
Yeah.
Did you want to talk a little bit about that?
Oh, absolutely. It's been very interesting. I've been blessed because I've been able to do science, and there have been many people that have supported me. Well, what I realized and it was a famous physicist that said that, is if you just do science by itself for the sake of science, there's sometimes, and his name was Richard Feynman, very famous physicist.
He's an awesome guy.
He said sometimes you can't do good science, and what you need is to teach. And I thought about that, and I realized that was absolutely true. And so my aspect is I lecture a lot now to the middle schools, high schools, colleges, and even graduate schools, and then even there's the general community. But what I learned was, it was very interesting, is I did this and I thought it was community outreach, but no. You know who learned the most it was me. So now one of my aspects is some of this stuff is now developed over the many years, and now I go to the schools, and my key aspect there is to teach them how to do science without having fancy equipment. Before, I used to take into a lecture, and I've got a lot of equipment in my lab, and some of it's very fancy, and I bring some of the fancy pieces of equipment, and then I realize that doesn't help students recognize how to do things. So now what I do is, and I have a demonstration next week at a high school, prep high school, and I'm going to just take things that you can get. Everything's going to be less than $20. All these pieces you can put together. And I think what happens then is there's two. One is I've got to be versed enough to just use ordinary pieces. And what I realized was it wasn't that easy.
Yeah.
And then secondly is then the schools can then say, hey, you know what? Anyone can do this.
Sure.
So I look at stuff, and we actually have things that you have to remember back in the day of Newton, he didn't have anything. And yet he was able, with sunlight, just sunlight and whatever he had around him, and he was an expert at grinding glass, so he could use prisms and lenses, he could do everything. Well, that's the same type of aspect that we need to take to our schools, because really, if we keep science in a way that kids look at it and they say, well, it looks like my iPod, I can't figure that out. And you can't, because you look at the iPod and open it up. It's got all these. But if you can take it, then you can see the spark. And really, it's the same spark that I think has to happen when the kid took like the radio and showed me, here, see the speaker, the transducer and everything. And so what I really try not to do is I have a demonstration. It's portable, so there's no electricity involved in it.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And I bring it to the schools, and I let the kids touch it, and I think there, if one can really teach not to be afraid, to just go in there and plunge in, and you're gonna try it 9 times out of 10 when you first try it, it won't work. However, it's that aspect of, and that's what the students learn to learn, is that aspect of modify, change the process. That's right. And also that curiosity and that creativity of how do you solve the problem. So everything I had black rubber bands, and you start seeing that, and realizing there's some kids that's going to do some great science with just cardboard boxes.
That's really incredible. So you were really inspiring the future of nanoscience out there. Like running scientists.
Well, you know what you realize is, and I really enjoy this one in middle school, is interesting. If I go to the high school, colleges, or graduate schools, I'll give lectures, and nobody knows the questions. I'll say, but you go to the middle school, and they always ask you questions. And so there's that curiosity that I found out in middle school that's very important, where they don't mind asking questions because they're still at the age of, they're now very cognitive about math and science, and yet you haven't gone to the high school level where, there's more of this stigma of, being wrong and being perfect. So what I found is I'll get all sorts of questions at the middle school level and all sorts of answers, and some of those answers had made me think twice about science, because they'll ask things that come generally from the fact that they're just looking at what I've told them and what they've learned, and then they ask the question that sometimes I just never thought of. So it's interesting, but this process of going out to the community, I thought would be, I'm going to impart knowledge. That's really funny, but the best teacher has the best students, and the best students have the best, it's this process. And so I've learned a lot by going to the community.
I bet.
And it's been very enjoyable.
That's fantastic. So if somebody out there wanted to have you come to their school, how do they go about doing that?
They just have to contact me on my email, and they have to be, I'm pretty busy, but when there's a break, I try to get them all in. So there was a bunch of schools that asked me in the fall, and we're very busy, but then afterwards, I made time when the breaks come, and if you just send me an email maybe you could post.
Yeah, I can definitely. Sure, yeah, we can definitely post that. Check our Google Plus page after the event. But yeah, we'll post Matt's information.
Yeah, and then, but yeah, I'd be glad to, because what I really think is this aspect of there's two things that happen. One is by being in the community and helping out, and also you gain a lot of benefit. You gain a lot of benefit from the fact of, I'll be honest, we had a big project that was just due yesterday.
Oh, wow.
And then, but I had scheduled some a week ago to, go to this high school. So I went there, and then I was making my demonstration a little bit better, and I kept working on it, and there were problems and this. But you know what happened was, it was interesting. I think that thought process helped me in this major report that I had to deliver, because my mind started thinking a little bit differently. And so I know we did a very good report, and I think a lot of that stemmed from the fact that I had to deal with these issues that were completely different, but trying to work with students. And you start realizing that this one pulls you out of the box, so it's a plus for everybody.
Yeah, everybody wins. Really cool. Okay, we have a couple more questions here. All right, from our GEX team, and this comes from one of our guests on the floor, it looks like. How long until the technology that you are working on will be made available to the public, I guess?
Okay, so my company, we generally don't publish. However, most companies recognize that patents are very important. So right now, from our technology, we have 3 issued patents and we have 3 pending. And both those one deals with lasers and one deals with transistors. Now, when you look at that, most of our applications are for these very highly, what we would call severe applications for the military.
Okay.
So that's where and so one of the things that we like about the military or the government, is they're a very difficult proving ground. That being said, once you get the technology in, to go into the military, actually the proving ground is very long. So if you look at it in terms of commercial, technology into the commercial goes very quickly.
Okay.
Because you have a huge volume of people and funding that goes in. But when you do it at the stringent levels of the military, they're looking at things that are really not for general commercial. And so longer. So typical, if you look at some of the military systems that are out there, a lot of companies like Raytheon, they use 20-year-old systems. Wow. So really, you're looking at something that may take longer. Now, the thing that's good about this is by doing this type of application, it also teaches us, and we are very aware of consumer applications, so we really try to target that, but we look at the balance of the two, and right now we're doing things at the state of the art. And these things always take a lot longer.
Sure.
And but that said, I think that it's exciting for us because those can go quickly. So if we make a newer breakthrough, and it can go within 5 years.
Wow.
But really, typically, you're looking at probably in any type of research project, 5 to 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So
that's a big span.
Yeah, it's a big span. But you know what's interesting about that is. I worked at a big corporation, Motorola Corporation, a long time ago, and what I realized was when I worked there was you would see technology kind of rise at Motorola and then it would go away, but really one of the keys was staying in the game, staying in the technology, and I've known many companies that started, and now their technology is very important, but sometimes getting into the mainstream, especially when it's these high-tech solutions, take a lot longer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. So thank you for your question. We have another question here from Sora Soul. Utilizing nanotechnology, what is your dream project?
Well, that's an interesting question. We've been able to do some very fundamental work on materials, and I always thought that, there are things like we could work on these really what we call two-dimensional structures. There's one called graphene.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. And that's been a pet project of mine, but I haven't actually been able to do much on that because I just, you have to figure out an application, you have to figure out a way to do this. But what I found out was very interesting is there are problems that exist in the world, that just exist, and usually what happens is you can look at these commercial problems, and these commercial problems, whether they be military or consumer related, have issues. And what I found out was sometimes I like to be surprised. Sometimes what I find out is you go into the literature and you start doing the research, and initially you start seeing that the research was well done, but then you start realizing, no, there were gaps in the research. And that is very exciting to me because there we can contribute a lot. To start a project from scratch, if you really look at it, the invention of the transistor happened at Bell Labs a long time ago in the 40s. And yet, those scientists now have created this generation of transistors and now permeate the world. But however, they didn't get their project to actually do that. So usually, if you create the initial project, generally, that doesn't actually give you the whole breadth. And so what I found out for us is actually to take a project that we see and then use our key strengths, our technology advantages, and then apply to that. And then what you do is you see advances very quickly, because what's happened then is you're now using the community of resources, whereas if you're the first one to do it, and actually you're in by yourself. And then it takes longer. So what we found out is we make very good progress these days because our technology is based on the community of other scientists
That's really
that are
cool.
going. And so we have a lot of and really what we found out is if you do science in a vacuum, then, for one, the biggest enjoyment you'll miss is that you won't actually interact with other scientists and have all these interesting discussions, and actually everyone gets better, and that's better. To just say that I'm going to do it and figure it out myself, you may be able to do it, but I don't think that, and some people try, but I think really it's this connectedness of science where you reach out to the general public, to other scientists, and that really makes a project go well, and that's where we've had our breakthroughs. So I'll be honest, there's been pet projects I've wanted to do, but